much of this Rangers modernisation story this season ran perfectly with the pace of change happening around it. The game itself was starting to realise that the introduction of freedom of movement and employment throughout Europe after 1992 may have an impact on contracts and transfer fees, and the appearance of satellite dishes on homes throughout Britain in the February of 1989 brought football's governing bodies to the understanding that television was something to work with and not fear. Even the old city of Glasgow itself, with the new St Enoch Centre representing a kind of modern retail experience at one end of Buchanan Street, and the construction of the Royal Concert Hall providing a fitting auditorium for the soon-to-be European City of Culture at the other, was shaking off its hard, grimy and dangerous image. And yet it juxtaposed so sharply with other events throughout Britain at the time. This was also a time of tragedy in the country, a reminder of where investment was still lacking and why, despite how Fukuyama would be misunderstood, the victory of liberal democracy was not yet complete. The very day Rangers resumed pre-season training for 88-89, the Piper Alpha disaster raged in the North Sea, killing 167 people. 4 days before Christmas, 270 people lost their lives when Pan Am Flight 103 was destroyed by a bomb planted on board and landed on the Nova Scotia town of Lockerbie. Rangers would play Gretna in a fundraiser in the January. And then, on Cup semi-final day in both Scotland and England, came Hillsborough, the tragic nadir of English football's reckless indifference, which cost 96 Liverpool fans their lives and ensured that real action and reform instead of empty gestures was now unavoidable. To talk a little bit about that and the Rangers title win and a treble loss, he's joined by David Edgar. How are we, David?
Good, thank you. Yes, a lot of memories even just in your introduction there, and it was a vibrant time, and you were aware of change in Scotland, and the 90s were coming, and it was going to be totally different to what had gone before. And then Hillsborough came along, and you were just reminded again how much had to change, how much needed to change. And I think football fans right across the UK had all experienced something similar. Rangers fans on that day, as we'll discuss. And a poignant and a time that led to long changes, which I think overall much more in the plus than in the negative column.
Yeah, and if you've been listening to the show for a while now, you'll know by now that if David's here, Alan Bradley is also here. Good evening, Alan.
Yeah, good evening. You doing okay, yeah?
I'm doing all right, thank you. You might hear by the voice that we really should have recorded this. For many reasons, we should have recorded this before the Old Firm game of Sunday, 3rd of April. The voice is just about holding up. Anyway, let's go on. David, you did mention that there is a lot of change happening, and it's why I use the word juxtaposition, because modernisation is the theme that just keeps coming through when I've been researching this whole period. Words sometimes matched by deeds, not always, but the Rangers story felt like that. It felt new, and it felt space age, and it felt the future, and yet in this season where Rangers on the pitch and off the pitch represented very much that, there were these reminders of where kind of British society still was, and it was quite a jarring memory when I was looking back through it. Let's go to that semi-final. Is it Parkhead against St Johnstone, lower league St Johnstone? They were on the up. They joined the Premier Division not that long after. Officially, 47,374 spectators were in Parkhead to watch Rangers. I think toil in the sunshine in that Scottish Cup semi-final. It finished 0-0. It was pretty desperate. Rangers, I think, just expected to turn up and do the job. St Johnstone, it was their cup final, and they celebrated as if they had won that. I was there at Parkhead that day. I was in the main stand towards the Celtic end, where Rangers were given for some reason. They were given the Celtic end of the jungle, I think, and I could see that there were issues. That something had kind of collapsed, and there were Rangers fans on the track side. That there was clearly a disorder. Rangers fans talked, trying to get in. There was a bit of a jam trying to get in. They were complaining to police, who told them, "You're just spoiled by Ibrox. You don't know, you've never had it so good. You need to kind of get real." This was the kind of mentality getting into Parkhead around that time. So I'm watching this, as an 8-year-old, but in my ear, I'm hearing guys around me talking about people dying. Now, in their ear was a transistor radio, and they were getting news coming up from Hillsborough, of course. The issues at Parkhead were thankfully minor. But I do remember being a bit confused as to what I could see, which looked a bit unusual, but not catastrophic, and what people were talking about. Do you have any memories of that day at Parkhead?
Yeah, the one that really sticks with me is we were at the game, me and my dad, but he'd got the tickets. He was working in Springburn in Glasgow at the time, so it was great for being able to, nip across the ticket office and get tickets for matches. So we did quite well in this period. And the novelty of going to Parkhead to see Rangers not play Celtic was, you know what you're like when you're that age, that kind of thing really appeals. And also because the other season ticket holders in my class weren't going, which all the guys who went regularly, rather, they weren't going. So that extra cachet you have of, I'm going to the semi-final. And I was fully expecting an easy victory, and it didn't happen. We saw, as you did, what had gone on, and my dad immediately assumed trouble, because it was the 80s.
Yeah.
You got a lot of flashpoints, you got a lot of trouble. And then you could see that there were people hurt, and that there wasn't that. You guys will remember, and listeners who went to games in the 70s and 80s will remember, you could kind of spot trouble by the way that it happened. There would be like this flurry, if you like, of movement and shouts and roars, not only from the people in it, but from people round about them. Would almost gather round and sort of get to a safe distance, and then along with as the blows went in. And it wasn't that, it was different, and it seemed to get sorted relatively quickly. And then, as you mentioned, the news from Hillsborough came in, because it was a big game. Liverpool, Nottingham Forest, FA Cup semi-final. You were wanting to know what the result was, people with their coupons, of course, and it hadn't kicked off. And I immediately thought maybe something like, because I'd watched Heysel as an 8-year-old on the TV live, and I thought it was maybe that, because you know what you like, again, at that age, Liverpool, I associated them with that, so was this that? And the thing I remember, as I said to you very specifically, was when we got into the car on the way home, raging about the result and the performance, because it was inconceivable to 12-year-old David that Rangers could not beat a lower division side overnight. I mean, it was actually inconceivable. I just could not get it into my head that this was a possibility. And I was so nervous in the last few minutes that they were going to get one and knock us out. Because, as I say, my cup record at this point is diabolical, really, and it will be till 1992. So we get into the car and we're listening to it on the way home, quite somberly. My dad, who shouldn't make us, that's what surprised him, they're quite a talkative child. He wanted to hear this. And when we got there, he parked and he turned around and he said, "Don't tell your mum about what we saw at the football." And I was like, okay, why not? He said, "Because she'll stop you going." Now, if there was a threat that would, it was that. And my dad instinctively knew, and he's told me since, and my mum spoke to me since, my mum had nightmares about me going to football because of 71, because she knew what that was. And it was only the fact that Ibrox was Ibrox. And she didn't watch football. So my dad, I think, had led her to believe that pretty much all stadiums were like Ibrox now, right?
Parkhead certainly was not.
No, and neither was Rugby Park, where we would go occasionally, and various other places. But I think he'd sort of led her to believe that. And he knew instinctively, if she'd sat and watched this on the TV, which she had, because Grandstand was on, you'll remember. And they showed it live. They weren't going to show the game, but they had reporters there, obviously, for Match of the Day. And they literally, you saw it all unfold, and she sat watching it, doing the ironing. And he knew. He said, if she sees that and thinks there was something similar happened, she won't let you go. And my dad is a very realistic man. He knew who would win that fight, and it wouldn't have been him. So that was that was very much a thing of just a reminder of how. And at the age I was at, you then think, you put the connections together, you go, well, if he didn't want me talking about it because my mum will think it's that, it must have been like that. And I couldn't, because I was mainly an Ibrox guy. And when we did go, we got there. My fault. I'd make my dad go in there for about 1:15 to grounds. I like to sit, read the programme, soak in the atmosphere. So we never really got caught up, even at away grounds. We would get in as soon as they opened the gate, really. So I was never involved in that sort of thing. And it just, to a kid who'd grown up in the 80s when Ibrox was Ibrox, and I had stood in the enclosure plenty of times, but it wasn't big enough, I think, to really. I'd never done it for an Old Firm game, so maybe that would have been different. But it just blew my mind that this could happen. And of course, the thing we should always be grateful to the people in Scotland for, to the SFA, and it's maybe not a phrase that we use often in Scotland, but we absolutely should, is that they would not put fences up. That they just point blank refused to put fences up, and you would see them in England. And you look back on it now and you think, my God, talk about they treated these people like cattle. And of course, the argument then is, well, they acted in a bovine manner, so that's why they were treated like that. But I think it's a chicken and egg thing. And
it's visionaries that see beyond that. Yeah, they see beyond that, don't they?
And mate, I will always be grateful to the SFA, to Ernie Walker, for that. Whether he did it out of conscience, whether he did it to be different, whether he did it because he was being told not to do it and he was a contrarian, I do not know. But had there been fences in place that day, we would have been staring at a very similar event.
Yeah, and not the only one, I think. Alan, any memories of that? Where were you that day?
Yeah, I was at that game. Went to supporters bus. A wee bit different to, obviously, with David. I think I'd be 26, 27-ish, then. So obviously I had a lot of years of going to away grounds and seeing, obviously, crowds and congested things. And as Davey said, some of the kind of problems. But right away, I think we were in the jungle. I was there with David Bess. We were actually in the jungle over, and you could actually look over. And I remember saying to Davey the minute it started, look, there's just too many. You could see them coming in for that back corner, between the Celtic end and their stand. And fortunately, as David said, without obviously anything, they were just actually coming over the top. But you just felt as if something's, that this isn't safe, what's going on here. And then it wasn't that long after it, I think, that, again, it was someone mentioned it, the word starts going round, something's happened down at the semi-final down there. So, and then obviously it just puts everything into perspective again. The game was horrible, as you say, Martyn. I think the second half, we had quite a few chances and so on, but we just seemed to be kind of going through the motions. And I would say I had seen some of those, even in the good 70s. We would end up going to extra time with, I don't know, Forfar, Montrose, or, you get the odd wee blip where you just tell something ain't right and they're putting everything, into it. But no, I remember seeing that one, and I think it was more back in the supporters bus as well. And then there's more stuff you're listening to in the radio. And obviously, I go back home, and obviously Margaret's been watching it, as David had said. Again, I know it, but as far as Margaret was concerned, no, there wasn't any of that, because you can understand why people, and especially because of, like, as a kid and like our families and the Ibrox disaster, there is always that wee bit about what's happening at football grounds. But it was just absolutely just so sad. I felt as well when we went obviously to the replay. Again, it was different because everything had been put into perspective.
Yeah.
Because obviously we had seen it, and okay, we'll get into the game and so on. But with that, and like you've said too, with the other things that had happened in society, the kind of wider one, and as much as we all go as if it's the end of the world and all that, well, hey, I'm sorry. And it's things like that, sadly, but things like that, they do really slap us in the face, don't they? And I think my biggie looking forward as well on that one, it was just such a shame that this was going on and on and on after it, even all the court stuff, and I think even to this day, but no, just such a sad, kind of sad day, Martyn, yeah.
To the football then, the replay was quick. It was the Wednesday night after it, and Rangers in that brilliant Monaco-esque away strip, because we changed the strips round, back at Parkhead, 4-0 winners. Again, a game or some goals, especially Gary Stevens' goal, the second, are to be savoured. It really was a maybe a rocket up them, because it was a poor Rangers performance on the Saturday, and they definitely delivered. And there was an excitement then. I remember my dad being pumped because Old Firm Cup final, first in, well, since the riot, I guess, 1980, and they're like, here we go. It's going to be the way to finish the season. We will get to that in a moment. But it really was a super display. Rangers followed that up in the league as they motored towards that title. A good 2-0 win at Love Street. Notable for Ian Ferguson's second goal, which were in the top corner, but always loved the ball boy who's standing just behind the goal. Crouch and to try to get out the way of this utter thunder blaster that came from miles out, forgetting that the net would actually save him. Which meant that the Rangers, going into a home fixture against Hearts at the end of April, could win the title if Aberdeen failed to beat Celtic, which they duly did.
Walters is there, Wilkins and Sterling. And there it is, and it's in! Beautifully by Sterling. And off he goes. Oh. Left it to each other. Look at this comedy of errors with Drinkle. Well, that's not a bad ball then. A great goal, Sterling. Superbly taken by the big man. He is having a field day. Looking for Walters, and he just gets him there. Price. Oh, brilliant goal, Drinkle. Oh, yes, superb goal. Well, the 3 goals from the 2 Englishmen, and how about that? Off is Ferguson. Cowan. There's a race forward, no offside. Drinkle. And he's done it. His second. Rangers fourth. And you get the feeling that if Rangers really wanted, this could develop into a run. Well, there's an almighty roar going up over Ibrox. The final whistle has gone at Pittodrie. It is nothing each, and the Rangers supporters realise that. I'm not sure if the Rangers players do, but the championship is Rangers on. Technically speaking, they're 4 minutes away from it.
Get to the Rangers stuff in a minute, David, but I think a fitting fashion in which they kind of settle this title, really. Aberdeen drew 0-0 at home to Celtic. It was the 13th of 14 league draws that season, and it just kind of typified this season and the season we're going to come to next, that all the chasers, all the runners and riders behind Rangers, they just cut each other up all the time. None of the rest could really get any kind of sense of consistency. Get into that one. A wee bit different because it's not completely in your hands. Can you remember much before the game? I guess a lot of radios in close by, David?
Yeah, definitely. I always, whenever we're assuming on another result, don't tend to think it will happen. But great believer in just do our own business, because we were going to win it. I mean, that was the thing. It was unlikely it would take a, as you like to say, a Devon Law style collapse for us not to go on and win the title. So with that in mind, I think that I was fairly relaxed, or as relaxed as I got going to the game. But for a lot of older people, I could be out on the sauce tonight.
Yeah,
I think a contributing factor to, I really hope that it happens today, because I can get out and on the battle. Now, I understand that now as an adult, more so that, if we were going to, win the title and we were waiting on a result. And again, it's this thing that younger people that these games would never be at the same time now. They just, they categorically wouldn't be, as we saw last season with the Celtic game on the Sunday. So there was a sense of expectation, really, And one of the things that struck me that day was everyone, because it was a kind of murky day, I remember.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, it wasn't sunny or anything. It was a sort of murky day. And I kind of remember looking around the ground and being struck by how many people were wearing the top or that beautiful training kit, the Umbro red, white, the one with the kind of red bib, white bib with the two red stripes. Still my very favourite Rangers training top of all time. Or some other piece of this more modern merchandise that we were getting into. And it just seemed everyone was wearing a top or a tracksuit or that. And as if they'd almost dressed up for the day so that the stands would look this collection of red, white and blue. And it sort of struck me that maybe people were preparing for this to be a much photographed, much recorded day, and they wanted Ibrox to look as immaculately red, white and blue as it possibly could. So yeah, I do remember the sense of expectation. On your point then about the rest of the other teams, I think it's very interesting. We've touched on this in this show several times, and I think we'll need to do so for another couple of years at least before it becomes a redundant thing. There were good teams in that division. There were 5 or 6 teams that were more than capable of getting a result off each other at any time, and a result off us or Celtic or whoever. It was not 2 teams and everyone else. It'll soon move to that, and actually one of the 2 teams isn't Celtic, it's Aberdeen. But in this period, there were plenty of teams who at the start of the season, it's not that long ago since Dundee United and Aberdeen, and it's certainly not that long ago since Hearts got within 7 minutes and then blew it. It's a case of them at the start of the season thinking, with a tailwind, it's got to be difficult because of Rangers. And I sometimes wonder if the pressure of expectation, and we talk about some Rangers team folding under it, sometimes I think the pressure of expectation can be a positive, because that amount of draws is frustrating, but a club where we didn't lose can be played and it not be a full-blown crisis, then maybe it's easier to slip into that. Maybe at Ibrox, where you've got the fervent crowd and the fact I mean, if we draw 3 games in a row, it's a disaster. It's manager sacking. It's all of that. And then the other thing that I think is a factor in that, the teams who didn't achieve, or did achieve that title, were the teams who had managers who wouldn't accept it, i.e. Alex Ferguson, Jim McLean. We had Graham Souness, and we had the pressure of the support. So I think sometimes pressure does make diamonds. Aberdeen, throughout this period, were a right good side, but they often seemed a satisfied side. Yeah. And they still had a lot of players from the glory era. They still did. I mean, they were bringing through a few new ones, a few signings, but they were getting older, and they had a full set. They had a full set of every medal, more than one, and a European trophy. And I do think that maybe was a big driving factor for Rangers, that our fans wouldn't accept it, and our manager wouldn't accept it, and also, the people at the top of the club, there was so much money had been spent, everything was about moving forward, that maybe when push came to shove, our fear of not winning was greater than theirs, and we used it positively.
Alan, 4-0 win, Kevin Drinkle with 2, he'd be the top goal scorer that season. Mel Sterling popping up with his cameo in a very kind of short pace of time. It was just a very fun afternoon. And very different from 2 years before. Terry Butcher says, it didn't mean nearly as much as the first one, even though the Rangers had the chance to, win it in front of a full Ibrox. We obviously didn't have it at Pittodrie. But that manic, adrenaline pumping kind of celebration. This is not the first time you've experienced this. The first time that David's experienced this, though, of a title that feels processional. It could happen today. Hopefully it does happen today, but it'll happen next week. It doesn't matter. It's going to happen. You had that a few times in the 70s. But this was very different from Pittodrie.
Yes, absolutely right. And it's good the link that you made as well, even to the 70s, because I remember after the long period, the 9 or the 10 or whatever it would be, Kilmarnock, Celtic, and then the Easter Road one, and then obviously we've got, for us to win it. It's funny because the next one, although it was good winning it, getting the treble, it didn't feel the same. And I think even if you look at the attendances as well, and the Wallace ones after that one, it became the 9 thingy. I don't mean stopping the 9, but the fact that you haven't won it for such a long time really builds up, and that's what happened. And when Souness came in there with that big massive gap, so this was just like, my goodness, like the holy grail, at the time. Okay, the season prior to that was a bit of a shit show for loads of different factors. But again, you're right, and with Big Butcher, I think he said that when this one comes in, it became more of a, well, we're sort of back in top, or we're thereabouts now, and that's good, we've won the title. And to be honest with you, that feeling going forward as well, I know later on there'll be some where you go there and they go, what's happening today? Oh, we're getting the trophy, right? I'm nicking away. It definitely had a different feel about it. I think, like David said as well, I think there was quite a few of the old inflatable champagne things in that, David. But you're right. I think it was more a case of, we could win it, but we're not sure. And I'll put my hands up and say, I think I was late home that night. Maybe wasn't straight off the bus. So, I mean, it was a great feeling, obviously, winning it. But again, just not the same, as you say, of the Pittodrie after that period of time.
Souness makes mention, as he does all the time, we've spoken about this before on these shows, to Archie McPherson afterwards about injuries. We've done this despite injuries. We couldn't do that last year. Obviously, Durrant's injuries, the crucial one. There was no John Brown that day. There was no Ian Ferguson for the Hearts game. Ray Wilkins had to come off after 20 minutes. This would be impactful in a few weeks. But he was very, very proud. In that diary that he wrote, he said, it really summed up what we've been preaching to the players all the way through the season. If you do your own job right, then no one will be able to beat you to the title. You don't rely on others, do it yourself. Written by Souness in his diary. It could have well been the diary of the Prime Minister herself, that individual responsibility being hammered home and home again. David, 87-88 that we talked about, obviously, a few weeks ago, Rangers took 16 points out of 40 from the kind of mini league of Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Dundee. This kind of 6 teams, Rangers, Celtic, Hibs, Hearts, Aberdeen, United. 16 out of 40. 86, 87 it was 26, and this year 28. It's so important. It certainly was, just based on what you've spoken about before, but when you could easily drop points here. To do the biz here, David, against these teams around you, be better than anyone else in this mini league, and then just take care of the muck underneath. Here's how you win a title. And Rangers really did. When it came to the crunch, when those big games, this season especially, they really, really did meet the target.
Yeah, you couldn't win the league then by beating the Dross. And not being able to play against your rivals. You had to be able to turn up in the big matches, or forget it. There were too many teams that could cut your throat. You said it yourself. On any given day, Hearts could beat Rangers, especially away. Hibs could beat Rangers. They could beat Celtic. They could beat Aberdeen, and vice versa. There were very few fall-down shocked results, which is why, incidentally, Hamilton or Dunfermline retain that because I've seen younger bears say, how come people going about Hamilton when they were in the same division as you? And I think you don't get it. You don't understand. That's why it felt so seismic, because the teams around you most certainly could get points off you if you weren't up to it. So to be champions, and again, this is why I say that it maybe felt a bit more, much as I love being champions now, much as I've loved when we've done it, in the 2000s, there was a sense of achievement because of the level of competition that I think would be hard for any modern title to get. And I know that's old man shouts at cloud, but I do think it's demonstrably true that the sides around us were better. The football wasn't great to watch, folks. I'm not going to lie to you. There was an awful lot of kick and rush. There was an awful lot of industrial tackling. If at least one player in any given top Premier League match in Scotland didn't walk off the pitch with a broken nose after an elbow, then he was very lucky. But it still had a level of competition that it just doesn't have now. And the year before, I don't think the team had adjusted yet to being champions and everybody being after them. In maybe a way that in the first year there's that novelty. And as you mentioned, Terry Butcher said there, they had that wild, we need to do this, we are going to do this. And that sustained them in those matches. The second season, they've been to the top of that mountain. And these teams are now gunning for them. These teams don't like us. They want to put us back as they see it in the place. And again, they all have title ambitions of their own. They know that if they can get points off us, that they're capable of getting points off the others and going on and winning it. So, yeah, I definitely think there's something in that. It was such a great day. Do you remember the Mel Sterling helicopter? That was the first.
That's right. Yeah,
that was the first I'd seen a helicopter celebration. And I love Mel Sterling.
Listen,
Souness.
Did a job?
Yeah. He did. He was a fine player. He had a really good career in England, Sheffield Wednesday and Leeds United.
And Souness sold him for a profit. Come on, do a job. Just give me this. Help me sleep at night at the thought of losing Gary Stevens, because all my players are going to get injured at some point. Come in. All right, well, you can play up here. You can do that. And he pops up. And it's right. Well, thanks very much for your time. That's all we needed you for. We make some money. We'll try and devote a bit of time to a weird thing with Graham Souness. In terms of his managerial career, this is his first job, obviously. Post Rangers, his ability in the transfer market is laughable. The George Weah cousin being the perfect example, that Ali Dyer, whatever his name was at Southampton.
Steve Harkness playing for Benfica.
Yes, so dreadful. However, at Rangers he was superb, buying and selling, just getting big name players, long-term investments, and loads of these short deals. Just do a job for us. Some didn't work, right, fine, you're out. Now, easier when there's, you could do it. You can wheel and deal. There's no two windows to do it and blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, he used the market so well. And it's weird that the rest of his career was absolutely such a shit show. I'm asking you, I don't have the answers tucked under my sleeve as like a kind of trivia question. I'm asking you because of your vintage. My overriding memory of footage of that game, and it's very, very late 1980s football, was inflatable champagne bottles in that case. Where did this come from? The bananas are something I do remember from England. I don't know if there were other more sinister connotations to that. But
Martyn, we had the Colin Steen ones at the 73. John Cowden will tell you. So they're going way back into the 70s.
But they're making a real renaissance here, though, aren't they? I mean, these are everywhere in England.
It was England that it came from. They were suddenly everywhere in England, and then clubs up here started to get their own. And you know what it's like in the 80s. Things came along, fads came along a lot, because things proliferated in a way that they don't now, really. And fads, once they came in, the whole country would be seized by it. I mean, the whole country, I remember this year specifically, went from nobody in the country owned a shell suit to, by the end of it, you would go into what everyone wants, and there would be shell suits for all the family.
Absolutely.
A mum and dad shell suit and a baby. Cycling shorts was another one. People, I'm sure, will remember the black cycling shorts
under your shorts.
Stripe.
I had one. I had one.
Under your shorts.
Yeah, luminous yellow stripe on the sides of the black, because Mark Walters wears them and he doesn't want to do his hamstrings, Mum. I'm concerned about that. So can we just ensure that when I'm playing for fucking Bishopton United or whatever on Saturday morning that I'm well taken care of? The shell suits, my word. My parents, oh God, this is embarrassing. We went to Portugal on holiday in 1990, the summer. They had matching Scotland shell suits, World Cup shell suits.
And I bet they weren't the only ones.
Absolutely not. About around November that year, for some reason, shell suits went very much out of vogue. But yeah, they absolutely went everywhere.
Yeah, can you also remember as well the time where it became the big jumpers, which you actually tucked into your jeans?
Chunky knits, they were called.
Yeah, and then the hairstyle, and you can picture Durant, Derek Ferguson, and that. But they were all wearing them, weren't they, in the white shoes and that. Yeah.
They all had deals with a place called the Sweater Shop.
That's right.
Chunky knit, and again, it doesn't really happen now. Fashion trends a little bit, of course, but because there are so many options, and because there are so many different places to consume information, that it's quite possible for things to come into play and linger for a while and then exit without it reaching mass consciousness. And in the case of football, these things, these inflatables were absolutely common. And then, of course, culture of football is a couple of buses start having guys carrying them.
Yeah.
A week later, there's another 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And it was a case, and you know, the sellers outside were selling them.
Yeah. It just came into my mind there. It just came into my mind. I haven't researched it. I might do it before I send this off for publication. Anyway, back to the stuff. That night where Alan was in the pub way past the time that Margaret had allowed him, I want to take you to Paris, the Parc des Princes, because France are playing Yugoslavia, a very disappointing 0-0 draw, which pretty much meant that Scotland had a place secured in the World Cup in Italy the next year. Michel Platini, who was the French manager at the time, you know, he got the white flag out. They had many around him, I think, to say, like, you know, we're finished. Scotland, they're already in Italy. This was quite a good and entertaining qualification campaign, guys, for Scotland. A difficult group with France and Yugoslavia. Draw with Yugoslavia at home, beat France at home, beat Norway away, the Cyprus away when I think Richard Gough scored about the 150th minute of injury time was a bit of a kind of nervy freak show. But this was a good settled team. It may well be because the Premier Division has moved from 44 games to 36 that Andy Roxburgh has a weekend just before these midweek internationals, so he had a bit of time normally to work with it. He had a settled striking partnership for the first time in donkey's years, it must be, with Scotland in McCoist and Johnson. Now, Johnson looks a more rounded, better player with his 2 years in France. He scored both goals against France at home. McCoist was involved in both of them. Each of them scored against Cyprus at Hampden, which kind of sealed the kind of deal really in April. This was a really good partnership. Some imagined, maybe, because they were good friends, international roommates, what could they do in the same club team? My word. But it was fantasy at the time, even more so in the last week of the season, boys, when Mo Johnson was sensationally paraded around Parkhead as their imminent, not done yet, 1.5 million signing. Listen, it was unquestionably ambitious by McNeil. They had to do something, and Celtic looking maybe for a bit of a tonic before the Old Firm Scottish Cup final that was coming up. He's the best striker in Europe, says Roy Aitken. There'll be no problem, you know, coming back, reintegrating into a dressing room that, let's say, he hadn't left in great terms a couple of years before. I remember vividly, listen, we have a Tin Cap Show special 30 years after Mojo. It's in the archives, folks, for a listen. But I do remember vividly my dad getting me up for school that morning. He would have, my parents had this radio alarm clock with a phone at the height of 1980s technology by their bed, and he would listen to Clyde's Sports Desk in the morning to find out, you know, what was happening that day, what was in that day's papers, basically. And he came to get me up for school, and he said, look, bad news, Celtic are signing Mo Johnson, he's going back there. And I said, is he really that good? He had hazy memories, of course, of 86, 87. He said, no, he's a really good player. This is a really bad one. Johnson was on the Celtic team bus to their final game. He went to Love Street, last game of the season, just to watch, of course. His agent, Bill McMurdo, was not there. He was at Ibrox, where he would normally be, to watch Rangers wrap up in not quite the party atmosphere. Gents, a 3-0 defeat by Aberdeen. Before we get to the conversations that may have taken place after that game, you remember being deflated, all those inflatables with all the air out them, David? This was party day, and you know, Aberdeen absolutely battered us.
Yeah, I'm 12, Martin, and the fact we've won the league doesn't take away the individual importance of a game for me. I sort of demanded that we win regardless. So I was utterly raging that day because I didn't realise that our players were basically drunk.
Yeah.
Right? And had been since the Hearts game, because I'm not at the age where I realise that yet. And they are these two-dimensional supermen to me. They're not human beings. So Rangers were an absolute shambles. And I think in games like that, it comes down to who wants it more. Aberdeen had a point they wanted to prove. And all this bullshit that does mean nothing, but the whole layer marker thing.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes players and management buy into it. Rangers didn't care, you know, and it was so apparent that Rangers team was going through the motions that day. They absolutely didn't care, which I think has repercussions in the cup final, in all honesty. But as it always does. But back then we didn't know things about momentum, or we certainly didn't discuss them if we knew about them. We just thought, they'll be fine, they're a better team, they'll turn up and win. But that day Rangers were honking. One of your pet peeves, Martyn, I remember very specifically, Alan, you'll remember this, the back four had an absolutely atrocious time with any ball in the air that day.
Yeah. No, it was just, I don't know, it was as if they just, well, you said Aberdeen wanted it more than us. We hadn't kind of down tools, but the attitude just wasn't right, wasn't it? And I don't even know, I think even some of as if it was let's try and keep ourselves for the final, let's kind of hold back.
Maybe that.
Do you know what I mean? But jeez, and I know we'd been beaten 1-0 the penultimate game of the season before with Aberdeen at home with the Roberts carry on, but this one, David definitely took us like kind of 3-0. It was like, you know what, but again, you've won it's a case of, well, we've won the league, fine, let's, like Martin's dad, everybody's looking forward to it. It's the first Old Firm final, for goodness knows what, but
the Johnson thing had stirred up that final, by the way, and maybe we were looking forward past that game, and maybe the players were as well, because you mentioned that there it was a statement of intent. Back then, I was a huge Scotland fan, as I think most of the nation was. I think this drift has happened for various reasons since then, but back then you did get over your club loyalties in the main. John Cowden wouldn't, but the vast majority of people would. And I loved the McCoist and Johnston partnership. I thought they worked so well together, and there was something I thought pretty cool about that look at the way that these two guys can play together, even though Johnston was clearly a much better player. He'd been a real good poacher, he'd been a real good penalty box striker at Celtic, but now he was, there was a touch for younger players, a wee bit like Kenny Miller, except much better, in that he would run the channels, he would work really, really hard. Tactically, he was on a completely different level to most of the players in Scotland because he'd gone to Europe. And back then, the benefits of going to Europe and playing under actual coaches was huge, and you could see it. And that qualifying campaign, France, that was a filthy night. We beat them 2-0. It was a cracking victory.
Team in the rain, yeah.
The Richard Gough header and that brilliant yellow and blue and white away top, the one with the hoop, it was a cracking top, and just there was a real feeling about going to the World Cup, and McCoist and Johnson were on fire. I never really thought anything, because I didn't think Ali would leave Rangers, and that was the only way they could play together. Obviously. Then when he signed for Celtic, I think as well, Celtic spending 1.5 million was a bit of a shocker, because they didn't spend that sort of money. They'd spent a few bob. McAvenny, I think, was what, 750. 750. So they had spent a bit of money, but that was a real, we're going to try and catch you. And nobody could deny that he was a great player. And it was what was quite funny is, as soon as he signed, I went from, I'll hold my hands up to this, I went from going, when he was at Celtic the first time, I hated him, right? Because he was wee, blonde. Long-term listeners to Heart and Hand will know my feelings about blonde men. And a wee shite, basically, right? A total wee naff, with the earring and the mullet and everything. And then he went to France, he came back, and he was just a much better player. And he obviously got on with Ali, which made him all right in my book. And I was, as much of a fan as you can be of an ex-Celtic player if you're a Rangers fan. And then he signed for them again, and I instantly hated him. I mean, instantly, it was right back, that feral, ferocious hatred.
Just the way it changed. I mean, I remember in Eastern Closure when he was with them, one of those games where someone's injured, and everyone's waiting, and we were giving him pelters, getting right. And as sure as anything, I think he went up and scored the winner. So as a footballer, as you say, he was a cracking footballer. But yeah, I do remember that. I think David Best were driving. Thought the weather was horrendous going to obviously the Scotland-France game. But as you say, his hold-up play, absolutely brilliant. I mean, he looked like the complete, striker. He could do the hold-up, run into channels. He was a smashing poacher as well, and he was brave. But I remember I'll lose any staunch points I ever had, because my best mate is a postman, the season ticket at Parkhead. I think I've said it before. And I remember we used to go down to each other's houses, and we went down that time. He was going to come back to Celtic, and on the mantelpiece, this is me giving my age away, the mantelpiece was a picture of Big Robert's young laddie, Robert, with Mo Johnson, with that daft jumper with his arm round him. And I was going, oh aye, yeah, wee Mo's coming back. They were absolutely chuffed to bits, weren't they?
As you would be.
Now clearly...
Oh, yeah.
You know, but at that point in time, and it just added to the, God, we've got this cup final coming, and the whole Super Mo thing. Yeah. It was building everything up, wasn't it?
Johnson in France was just a perfect example of something that was, I think, quite common with these players with good natural talent and instinct, and, you know, something about them leaving Britain a bit raw and being shaped and being moulded into better all-round footballers, and then coming back to international duty for England or whatever, just looking like, you know, different players. Anyway, after that 3-0 defeat that kind of pooped on the party, Bill McMurdo, of course, famously leaning by the radiator near the main doors, Souness walks past, and a throwaway comment that would start a nuclear reaction. If only we'd known Bill, we'd have been interested. Souness was told, look, never mind that PR exercise last week, this isn't done yet. There was an issue about who would pay the tax on Johnson's share of the transfer fee, even though Celtic had an agreement with not, and they'd put 400 grand down. This wasn't concluded. But I mean, you know, huge deal for obvious reasons. Maurice Johnson's not just a Roman Catholic, he is a former Celtic player. He's stated that he hates Rangers, he's been involved in that issue with Stuart Monroe, of course, amongst many others, and genuflecting the way out, blah blah blah. McMurdo just simply hadn't considered it as an option, but Souness asked, like, who would have, yeah. But Souness says, let's see, tell us. He gets a phone on the Sunday from McMurdo, he's interested. Okay, Souness speaks to Walter Smith, who I think 2 minutes after picking himself up off the floor, does agree, yep, we should go for this. Murray isn't quite as quick. I think Murray does take a bit of time just to have a think about it and weigh up the absolute drama that it would cause, but had to come down on the defence that, listen, on the field and off the field, this is something that needs to happen. What if Celtic have him? That's a big issue as well. But yeah, we have to break this thing anyway. We've talked about it long enough. Let's do it. And he gave Souness permission to go and speak. Souness met with McMurdo and Johnson in a little cafe outside of Orly in France to discuss the major terms, the big parts of the biggest transfer in the history of Scottish football, more of which later. We have this cup final, and Souness has got his own problems, injuries, of course. As I said, Wilkins was out. Derek Ferguson had an issue with his shoulder. It popped out against Cologne, and it popped out several times after that. Now he's dislocated, or the other one has popped out now. He wants to play, he's desperate to play, of course, but Souness thinks this is the kind of knock that could be preyed upon by fellow professionals. It's quite an easy one, isn't it? And also, it should be said, this is around the time that Derek Ferguson is caught in another incident with Ian Durrant, this time in crutches in a kebab shop in the Paisley Road West. I have no doubt that played some part in that decision to cut him from the cup final squad, which included him on the bench instead of a fit Ian McCall. And I think there's been an impression that Souness thought the match would be a breeze. You know, look at the record against Celtic that season. He could come on later, showboat, end his bad record with British FA Cups, because he never won it as a player with Liverpool. He said these two horrendous exits to Hamilton and Dunfermline with his Rangers manager, and finish his career as a player that day. That was unquestionably the plan. I was there, my first Old Firm game, full kit wanker. I don't know if you could call an 8-year-old kid that, but I did. I had absolutely the socks and everything. It was roasting. The Hampden pitch was just rock hard. It was burnt to a crisp. Not the best game, of course. Souness's opinion, the best player on the pitch was Gary Stevens, but even he had a momentary mishap with a terrible back pass to Woods. Joe Miller pounced the only goal of the game. Rangers would complain. Obviously, Bob Valentine missed the fact that Roy Aitken decided to take a throw in that wasn't his that led to that goal, but Stevens still makes the error. even more, I think, is the supposed foul by Mark Walters on Pat Bonner at a corner where Terry Butcher thumps in a header, which is a bit of a nonsense in the second half. It wasn't a good game of football. Celtic won. I was devastated because I got out of bed that morning, Davey, like my bed was on fire. I could not wait to go to this cup final, and it's the treble, and it's my first Old Firm game. It's going to be amazing, and of course it wasn't. But what I do remember was being part of, in my childhood mind, I'm happy to hear some more mature recollections on this, about maybe 10,000, certainly thousands, that stayed behind. There was a huge banner that had been made with kind of caricatures of this Rangers team in Souness. We want the Rangers. We want the Rangers. They wanted, even the disappointment of losing the treble, to give something back, to give a final kind of recognition for what had been an incredible season. And Souness wouldn't entertain that. He doesn't entertain losing. But that was my memory of that day. Yours?
I was so excited because every year throughout that decade, I had watched the cup final, one of the rare matches that was live on the telly, and they would start the build-up on TV at 9 a.m. for the Scottish Cup final, and we'd never been a part of it. It had been the Aberdeen Celtic, Dundee United, Aberdeen Hearts, Dundee United and St Mirren, for fuck's sake, Celtic, Dundee United again, I think, and then we're there finally. And I just, because we'd never had the build-up. The build-up was all week. They would do a thing on Reporting Scotland where they would go to the town, and the baker there'd be a baker who had baked a special cup final cake. That was always a thing. And there was just all these traditions about it that I'd never experienced, I'd never been a part of. And again, it might be difficult for younger people. Much as we love cups now, still, league is everything in pretty much every country. We know that. European football has grown to such a stage, but the cup final romance then was enormous, and it was protected, and it mattered, and I'd never ever got to experience it with Rangers. I'd watched other teams do it, so like you, out of bed first thing in the morning, watching the first couple of hours of the coverage, and then with my dad, my first Scottish Cup final, heading out. Not only was I a full kit wanker, I had the tracksuit on, despite it being roasted, because my dad is a great believer in the benefit. And even if it is roasted, you never know if you might need an extra layer. So the tracksuit was a compromise, because there was no way I was wearing a jacket. So the tracksuit top was put on, and my dad, being my dad, he brought the bottoms. They were in the car in case I got too cold, as if it was like fucking Vesuvius in that ground that day. And we went, and I just remember the atmosphere was wild. I'd never seen, obviously, the 50-50 split before in a cup final, although it seemed to me that we had more. I don't know if that's true or not, or just my vantage point because of where I was as a kid. And again, it's a flat old game, tired players, I think, end of a season. And again, we speak about sometimes it's who maybe needs it more. Rangers, I thought that day played a sort of sluggish football, that it seemed like an effort. And what all Celtic had to do, I think, was try to stay in the game, fight a bit harder. Yeah. I will never forgive that curly-haired cheating bastard, right enough. It's quite clearly our throw. Valentine lets him take it, and then it is our mistake. And to be honest, all jokes aside about the throw, that's what I focused on, because I'm me. I detested Joe Miller, by the way, even as a child. I fucking detested him. He was a wrong'un. I could tell by looking at him. I'm right. He is a wrong'un. And of course it would be him that puts it away. And then, you're hoping against hope, baking in the sun. We get the goal. I couldn't see what was wrong with it. I've watched it many times since. I still can't see what was wrong with it. And for fouling to be given in the box back then was, it hardly happens now. It never happened then. It was just a ridiculous thing.
Well, it happened last week. We spoke. I know it wasn't last week. When was it? We were talking. It was the end of 86, the 86-87 one when we lost 3-1 at
Oh, the
Parkhead.
Cooper corner.
Yeah, the Cooper corner. And again, because someone's aftershave was too strong for Pat Bonner.
It's an invented thing, and maybe it was Bonner had a certain, because when he came out into the wild of a corner, he did look like
Valentine again.
He looked like a wildebeest that stepped into the. But for Valentine to give it such an important thing was just ludicrous. And you knew when that happened, forget it, this is done. And of course, they celebrate. And it's a strange one because we've won the league and the League Cup, and it's a good season. And it's not, this is still, we're not that far removed from fighting for fifth or sixth. So it's still a good season. It's obviously a disappointment to go into summer, but maybe it's just youth. Maybe Alan, you being older, felt it differently. I didn't feel crushed by it.
And again, that's backed up by that Rangers support long after Celtic have been away with the trophy, by the way. And there is a sizable rump of the support, pardon to use that phrase at this moment in time, that wanted to genuinely show their appreciation for, I think, a brilliant season. Alan, briefly, your thoughts on that game. I forgot to mention, of course, McCoist, a massive sitter in that second half.
Left foot, snatched at it and missed at the end, or later on, I mean, same, well, what you guys know me as the Don't Jinx It loyal, chief executive guy. That week, I remember saying to 3 or 4 kind of people, Celtic fans, Rangers fans, if we even play 75% of what we can, we're winning it. Stupid Alan, just shouting his mouth off because we had done the 5-1, the sort of 4-1, obviously won at Parkhead. I was that confident. So going to the game, I remember going to the supporters bus, as you said, it was absolutely roasting. We were up in the back of the Rangers end. But unlike now, where people have got the phones and there's an hour before, here's the team and so on, we didn't know. We weren't sure, what was going to be. When they named the team and there wasn't going to be, obviously, there wasn't a Derek Ferguson, there was no Wilkins. I think Souness was on the bench. I think Serlin started. Right away, we just thought, something's no right there in terms of the midfield. So that knocked a wee bit of the stuffing out of us. I think what pissed me off with the goal, 2 things. One, the referee actually saw the ball kind of going out with Aitken, and then as Aitken took it quick, he waves it on. Okay, Gary Stevens doesn't clear it. What you said about it, the one thing I hate was watching that wee bastard, excuse me, but blowing kisses, to us when he scored as well. I went home from it, Davey. I didn't do the defiant, we'll support you evermore at the end. It was at full time. I'm out because I can't stomach watching what it was. I've said before at Aberdeen finals when they've beat us and things, but at that point I just wanted to go home. If you remember as well, I'd seen 2 trebles. I had missed the Greg one with the Parkhead one that could have been a 3rd treble. We then had a chance, obviously, the season before, and we blew it with the going to the Cup. Yeah. So I really wanted this one. And I remember getting off the bus at Motherwell at the time I stayed and just walking back and just feeling the lowest. I had probably been one of the lowest ever. And it's funny how things obviously changed a couple of weeks later. But for me, David, it was devastating for me. Yeah,
devastating for me as a kid. But yeah.
I think that's definitely perhaps like an 8. I think now it would ruin my summer.
Oh, I barely.
In fact, I say now. I mean, a few years later, Dundee United.
Yeah, we will cut.
My summer. So maybe it is just at that age because you think, well, there'll be more cup finals. You do, and you think you're just not aware of a lot of stuff. I just remember though that I've mentioned this before, but I just had complete belief in this side. Now as an adult, I can see, for example, Souness' decision to put himself on the bench was a shocker, and it was unprofessional, and it was putting himself ahead of the side.
Sorry, David, the 5-1 one, he had Wilkins in there, the 4-1 he had Derek Ferguson. So, as you say, for him to put himself on, probably thinking it was going to be a scoosh, big misjudgment, wasn't it?
I think he thought he'd win. He did think he'd win. But Derek Ferguson wasn't fit. Derek Ferguson injured his shoulder, and it's an injury that other pros can pry on. So I'm asking you, gents, on a cup final bench, do you want Graham Souness or do you want Ian McCall?
Yeah, all right.
On the bench, aye. Yeah,
which he was on the bench, and you're missing Wilkins, you're missing Durant, you're missing Derek Ferguson. This is a problem. which he would bemoan. But, you know, just champions, blah, blah, blah. And listen, Rangers' mistake, Rangers' good goal disallowed, Rangers' chances that should have been taken. Just one of those days. Momo Super Mo was belting around the one end of Hampden with a very defiant Momo fuck your Mo from the Rangers end. David Murray sitting.
That was me.
Yeah, it was you. Yeah, David Murray sitting quite uncomfortably, I think, the South Stand, wondering if this was really a good idea after all. Jerry McNee wrote a piece in the build up to that, I think, in the Express. He wrote book on Celtic. With Celtic leanings, I think it's probably fair to say. With Celtic at his heart, I think it's not unfair to say. Around something along the lines of, it would be best for Celtic to lose this, to see Rangers win a treble, to really rub their noses in it before the board will take action. Maybe it was a few weeks before because of the Johnson signing, but he felt that there was just this kind of limp and lacklustre Celtic board that it was, and it would continue to be for a few years to come. But it's one of these weird things you get in football fandom when you can see the ownership of a club going into trouble, and sometimes the only way to jolt people, and David, you'll know this for your time at the trust and whatever, are on-field results, because that's the only time that people get energised and get motivated. This possibly is one of the worst things to happen to Celtic. But then I'm not sure they really had it in them to turn it round in any event.
No, they didn't. They didn't have the squads to do that. They didn't have the structure in place. They didn't have the manager, if we're being totally honest, by this stage of the game. And they didn't have the apparatus in place to be a successful European club. The stadium was falling to bits. They were clinging to a romanticised, really from the 60s at this point, a romanticised view of what football should be. And I think that their board kind of felt that sending the players out to train in a public park in dirty clothes that there was something romantic in it, you know, that it was somehow we're keeping close to our roots and we're also pocketing the money we would need to spend on such things. So I think that was a consideration. And you're right, because they did use it as a, oh, well, that's all the pressure off us. We've won the cup. We'll be back next season, as boards do. You know, look, here is this one thing which, forget all the underlying issues that we've been discussing. We've won a cup and we beat them. So everything's okay, and we'll make this one signing. That still happens, Martin. You and I doing an English football show on this network. Manchester United still do that. Look who we've bought, this one guy who will fix everything. And that is exactly what they did. And you're spot on in that it wasn't a seismic defeat for us. It was a painful one because it's an Old Firm Cup final and it stopped us winning a treble. But it wasn't something that suddenly exposed that everything in the state of Denmark was rotten. It really did not. Everything was in place to be successful. And I think you see, I won't be on for the Mo Johnson show, so I'll just say it now. The decision to parade a player who wasn't signed was absolutely a complete and utter sign of a board who were just incredibly arrogant. Really. Yeah, and also that they didn't conceive of him not signing for anybody else because they were Celtic, and they clung on to that as unsuccessful big clubs do when they're going through a tough time. They cling on to the name. Well, we're Celtic. He's a Celtic fan. Of course he'll come here. He's not going to go anywhere else. And he's certainly not going to go anywhere else in Scotland. So we're absolutely fine to do this. And they did cling on to that for too long because they were a board from the 60s that couldn't accept, I think, both where football, the game was going, and football, the business, had gone. And you mentioned the tie-up between what was happening, the kind of similarities between Rangers, the political situation, how Rangers almost echo the way that Great Britain is feeling at this point, the feeling around the club. Celtic looked as though they came from another, proudly came from another era that they were determined to cling a hold on to, and Rangers just swept in and took it. So I totally agree with that. I think that maybe that, the whole Celtic for Change thing might have come along a wee bit earlier had they lost us, but this did give them something. We've had a bad season in the league, but look, we've signed him, we'll be alright. And look, Scottish Cup, and as I mentioned earlier, the romance, the Scottish Cup was a big thing. it definitely papered over a few cracks at Rangers in the next few years.
And I think for the record as well, I think the general consensus of Rangers fans was absolutely gutted at losing to them in a final. But the positive was our juggernaut just steamrollered that whole league. We've just got the best players there. We've got everything right behind the scenes as well. You know, with the kind of board, the management team, we're signing these players. So it was, if anything, the disappointment was just we get beat with Celtic in a final where we know for a fact as a club in all different parts, we're just far superior to anyone now. Yeah.
So your fans waiting back to show their appreciation, other than Alan, who's going up the road in a huff. Another man in a huff is the Rangers manager, whose medal had to be rescued from the dressing room bath by Doddy Suter, the Rangers kit man at the time. He was far from happy, as you would understand. And he told his players, just remember this feeling, it's the worst in the world, and I want you all to dredge it back up when the new season starts, he said, before adding some kind of cryptic remark about doing something that summer that would hurt Celtic for years. Some players noticed him say that, but they were tired. It had been an exhausting season, thought little of it. It wasn't until a few of them were back at Hampden the following Saturday that the penny really should have started to drop. Scotland were playing England at Hampden the following week in the Rouse Cup, which was then played between Scotland, England, I think all the home nations, and a guest team. This time
no,
from
just
Scotland
and
England, yeah, and Chile. From South America were the invitees. This time it had been Brazil, I think, the year before. This game was played on the Saturday after that thrilling First Division climax on the Friday night live at Anfield, where Arsenal snatched that title. Scotland had been in Troon all weekend, and Johnson was dropping hints to his roommate Ali McCoist about how nice Graham Souness's house was and David Murray's house was, and eventually had to spell it out more clearly. It was like being hit by a juggernaut, wrote McCoist. I actually hid my head underneath the pillow. I just couldn't believe it was happening. The messaging in the press the week after the cup final had changed. Small snags were always there. It moved to contractual difficulties, and it finished with Johnson that week apologising to the Celtic support that because of personal and contractual problems I am unable to go through with this move. Sorry lads, wish it was different. Billy McNeill, sensing that the deal was disintegrating, effectively bars his way past Andy Roxburgh into the Scotland camp to speak to Johnson. He waited in the foyer whilst the player finished a call with Graham Souness. McNeill told him that if he messed Celtic around, he'd fight him all the way. I'll make sure you never fucking play again. Johnson was quite sheepish and quiet. McNeill went to FIFA to plead the case that they had documentation, basically a letter with a will to do something rather than an actual contract, and they would fight it legally on the principle. But most people understood, including the Celtic board, that there was a principle here that if the player didn't want to play, then they weren't interested in trying to force him, and that Johnson unlikely then to return to Celtic. I guess the football world would need 1,000 guesses to predict his ultimate destination. But even during that Scotland-England game, it was struggling to register. Terry Butcher, who was superb in an England defence, half of which was made up by Rangers players, hell-bent on keeping a clean sheet at Hampden. He would do. England would win 2-0. He told Johnson he was looking forward to kicking him again next season. He was told, no, I'll be coming back to play with you. Johnson just assumed that it was a striker trying to get in his head and, just dismissed it. Even when all the pieces were laid out in front of Rangers players and the Scotland footballing public, it was a puzzle that the collective mind couldn't possibly put together. We will get into more of that next week. Boys, the reason I did this project was in the back of the last one, with the 50 greatest games still available. We had these 50 games voted for, I think 21 from around this era, which makes sense. But the vast majority were kind of bookends. You had 3 games from that first Souness season, and you had 7 whole games, a third of that from the calendar year between Gascoigne's hat-trick against Aberdeen to Laudrup's header against Dundee United. So this weight on the guys who finished this 9-in-a-row job, and the Souness revolution year that's been kind of done to death, I guess, in books and documentaries. I felt there was something interesting and unloved, and maybe just not the attention it deserved around his middle, because everyone, as I said, they talk about his arrival, they talk about his departure, but this team he had from 88 to 90, I repeat again, is, I think, the best he had. I think one of the best that Rangers had during that era. I guess, David, if that free kick or that throw-in hadn't gone the way, that back pass hadn't gone the way, the goal wasn't disallowed and we'd won that treble, that it would be lionised.
It would. I think there's a couple of reasons for what you just said. And firstly, one is age. A lot of people my age, that although this was our childhood team, we started drinking and having nights out and all that good stuff in the Gaza, Walter, Laudrup era. So that, you remember the cup wins or the big matches, because then you remember where you went after it and who you were with. So there's that. It's locked into that. And secondly, a lack of television, Martin. That meant that unless you were fortunate enough to get to the games, there would be some of these games that you might see the goals on a roundup, and that was it. That was your entire chance to see it. If Rangers weren't one of the highlights on a Saturday or a Sunday, you just heard the result and saw the result. So that's maybe why matches from this season aren't imprinted. And I think a guy who represents what you're talking about is Kevin Drinkle, who played terrifically well for Rangers this season. He really did, and scored a lot of goals, and he just doesn't get brought up as much as he deserves to.
No.
Because it was a fine side. He played very well with Ali McCoist, and I think this side is underrated and undervalued because, again, to just refer back to a point we made, look at where they were beaten.
Yeah.
Look at what they were dominating. Look at what they were going past. Sides that could quite easily have a shout. I mean, Hearts had reached a European Cup quarter-final, for crying out loud. Sides that could play, sides that could win, sides that were difficult. And I just remember this period so fondly, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, because everything about it is just felt on the up. Alan nailed it there, even for an older bear. Complete trust in the boardroom, the management, the players. And with that comes an ability to put disappointment away. And maybe it's the lack of drama at this point. Maybe it is the fact that there were no running battles, there were no running arguments. I don't know. But this side has a right to be talked about with much more fondness and much more often than it actually is.
Alan, any final words before we wrap up 88, 89?
Yeah, for me, I think I probably messaged you, I don't know, maybe a few weeks ago, Martyn, something to do with Rangers related, and I made it, probably sounds really cliche, it was like, I feel blessed to have, for 50 years, went through, the bad times, the Wallace stuff, the Greg, obviously this, and people always end up talking about the 9 in a row at the end when they finally done it. This for me as well, I've just loved it too, Martyn, because I just went to all the games, and you went to these games, as David said, I probably go out at night or whatever, but it's been brilliant to be able to look back and just kind of analyse some of them and actually see, I mean, this team, it wasn't all the physicality, that people talked about. This team played some absolutely fantastic football, the likes of, Wilkins, Walters, then you've got the, kind of Gary Stevens, Woods, Butcher. I mean, just such a great team. So I've loved it. I think it's also been good as well, looking at the whole change from Rangers being a real kind of bit of a shambles to having these kind of building blocks, which would keep us going for a while. And as you say, at the same time, looking at how Celtic are going to go down. But as Davy said too, which you forget, Aberdeen and United, the number of international players and quality players in those sides as well, and actually how competitive it was. So I loved it this year itself, this season, with the blip obviously at the end. To be honest, it was probably one of my favourite seasons, winning this league, winning the League Cup, and it gave me a real confidence, as I say, although I was gutted, but you're really confident, going into next season and, what's going to continue.
It's been a pleasure looking back over this last 4 weeks. Thank you very much, Alan.
No, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks. Enjoyed it as well with David too. Really good. So thanks, Martyn.
Thanks, boys. Thank you, David.
Oh, a pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed it. A great season, a great time to look back and maybe bring it into the light a wee bit more.
Yeah. Well, I think we've maybe done our job. Hopefully it's no longer underrated. It was, I think, a far better and more rounded team than the Sooners had before. Maybe more importantly, it was far more disciplined than it was before, which gets overlooked as well. It gave Souness the ability to actually pick players because they weren't suspended and there wasn't absolute chaos running riot. It could be powerful and direct, yes, but with Wilkins and Walters especially, it was a side capable of more than a little flourish on top of the steel. And most importantly, it was impactful. The necessary noise, I guess, and bombast of those 2 years was over. With some success ahead of schedule to enjoy, but now I think there'd been a significant gear change. If Aberdeen had been put on the ropes with a cup final win and 2 clutch league victories in the middle of the season, then Celtic, 5-1, 4-1 and the end of their home record were hearing bells. The knockout blow was just about to be delivered. Until next time, bye for now.